guys, welcome to JustDevelopers HTML course. So, how's everyone? I hope you're having a good day. So essentially I'm just going to go through this HTML and try and help you guys understand and progress in your knowledge of learning web development. My aim is to give out free education to those people that really maybe want to change career, or it's just starting off, or even just do it as a hobby. I believe everything should be free. I believe people should be able to learn and change what they want to do without the need to be restricted based on your funds. So let's get started, and yeah, so here we go. So here's what we're going to talk about. So what is HTML? So here's a couple of bullet points that I've created for you guys to read. You can sit here and read, or you can just obviously listen to what I say. It's up to you. So here we go. So essentially HTML in a very basic introductory is it's a front end page that you can access via the web. Anyone can promote their business. They can promote their own company, their own personal website, even a sports team's website. It's essentially just something that we can access via a web browser, that we can click, we can interact, and essentially it's just to make our lives easier per se. There's obviously a lot more to it on the actual coder side of it. A lot of users don't know about it, or they don't see it. To be honest, most people don't care about it, and not unless they're actually interested in learning how something works, or learning how something actually is put together. So that's the idea of this. So let's move on. So we've got the basic HTML structure. So as you can see from the screenshots, this is essentially what a basic structure will be for a HTML page. There's a couple of things in here that I won't actually cover in this HTML, but I will cover on in later videos, not based on this HTML course. That's actually based on HTML5, which is I'll talk about main, section, etc. So there's a couple of things here that I want to discuss and just help you get to know and understand as we talk through creating a website. So we've got the very first tag, which is we've got the doc type. So essentially what the doc type is to actually let the web browser know that we're going to use HTML5. There is a lot more to it than what I'm going to go into detail about, but essentially all you need to know is you need to have the doc type HTML in to use HTML5. If you're not going to use HTML5, which I can't see why you would do that, because pretty much every website either is using HTML5 or is moving over their sites from HTML4 to HTML5. That's pretty much it. As I say, I'll post up a couple of links on where you can read up about these particular tags. So we've then got HTML. So HTML is essentially letting the web page know that we're going to be using HTML. That's pretty much it. So you're letting the web browser know that you're going to be displaying HTML content via the backend, and then to display the HTML tags as actual content we want to see. So as you can see, I've got, for example, I've got paragraphs and then hello world, and it just displays a hello world. It doesn't display the paragraph tags. So it's telling the HTML tags is telling that we want to display HTML, but we don't want to display the tags, and that anything within those tags to actually display. Again, I'll post some links up about those, and you can read up, go into more depth if you really want to. Okay, so head. So the head is essentially where you place your title. As you can see, I've got a title, I haven't put one in. Meta information, scripts, you've got your CSS. Again, this is something that I will cover on later videos, but not in this actual course. Again, I'll post some links up. They'll tell you all the different types of tags we can put in the head. So like for meta, this is to help with search engine optimizations. Also to help with responsive web design, which you can use the viewports meta tags. Obviously the title, so at the page name far at the top, when you say, for example, go on Facebook, and you can see at the top you'll see Facebook. That's just the title. CSS, we can put some CSS in there, which can point to specific locations, or you can even do inline CSS, but you do it within the head. Again, I'll post some information and you can read the available tags. I will go over these in more depth in a different video, but just not on this HTML one. Okay, so we've got body. So on the body part, essentially it's just going to be telling the web browser that within these tags is essentially what you actually want to display. That's all there is to a body. Really not much you can go into detail about that other than anything within a body tag is what you want to display. As I said, we've got main and section, which is part of HTML5, semantic tags. I'm not going to go into these. I'm going to create a separate HTML5 course that's going to go through all the different main, section, footer, header, all those kind of tags. I'll go through separately just to give its own beginning HTML and a little bit more in-depth HTML. And then we've got our paragraph tags, which I'm going to go through. Again, these are just tags that are going to be rather helpful as you go through. And then what we've got to do is make sure that for every tag we open, we also have to close. For example, look at the main, I've got a closing main. Look at the section, I've got a closing section, I've got a closing body, and I've also got a closing HTML. We've also got a head, and then we've got a closing head. But you may notice that within our doc type HTML, we don't actually have a closing tag for that. That's because it's not actually needed for the doc type. This is just pure standard. There's nothing you need to do for that. So there's nothing you need to read about on the doc type and closing tags because it just doesn't have one. So it's very important when you're doing HTML that you have a beginning tag and an end tag. There is a lot of text editors that I won't actually be going through, but there's a couple that I recommend: Sublime Text, Atom, Notepad++. There's a few other brackets, but my favorite one is Sublime. So when we actually type in the tags, for example, title, if we then do the angled bracket and then a close, it will actually automatically complete the title part for you. So don't actually have to manually do it. So it will save you a little bit of time. So when you're opening closing tags, the closing tags will actually auto complete for you. There is other little nifty plugins you can get for the text editors that do help speed things up a lot more. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump on now to actually start talking about some tags and what different kinds of tags there are and what they do and how they work, just to give you a better insight onto HTML. So I just wanted to give you a basic understanding of the structure and how it actually works. But so for the next one is we're going to talk about is HTML paragraphs and headings, as I say. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So then, HTML paragraphs and headings. These guys are probably the most used tags as far as I personally think when it comes to HTML. They're rather important. They make a massive part of the content when that's displayed on a HTML page. So as you can see from my screenshots, that's kind of what the layout is when you're displaying paragraphs and headings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some more things we can do with those headings and those paragraphs. So also what I will do is go through on creating a HTML page from scratch. So there's not really much we can say about paragraphs and headings. There's more about showing rather than actually talking. So I think if we actually let's start actually doing something, and it might be actually show you guys on how it works. So here we go then. So let's get so I've kind of used the default template that I created previously. So I'm going to use that. So essentially we've got our doc type, our HTML, and then we've got our HTML tags, our closing tag, header, closing header, body, closing body, main, again, HTML5. I won't be discussing that. Just know that you should be using those. If you do want to read up before the other video comes out, then you're more than welcome to. I can post some links. And then we've also got section, and then we've got our paragraph. Okay, so let's begin with, let's add ourselves a heading. So we do H1, and then, you know, I was talking about Sublime and how it auto completes. Watch this. So once I've done the angled bracket close, it's automatically completed the H1 for me. So if I then go hello world header, and then we save that, we can save that by doing Control S. And then if we go over to our index.html page and refresh, and then we've got our HTML H1 header. Yeah, and then we've got our paragraph, hello world. And if we actually go into inspect, which is using the Chrome developer tools, let's bring that into view. As you can see, we've got our head, we've got our HTML, and we've got our doc type. So we've got a doc type, then as you can see now, HTML. So that's telling us where our HTML content is. And then we've got a header, so we've got a title, but as you can see up here, it's showing as index HTML because I don't have a title. Okay, and then our body. So this is telling what the browser to what output, you know. So if we then open up our main, open up our section, we can then see our header and paragraph. Just an FYI, if you do want to view this, you can press F12 on your keyboard to bring up the developer tools, just should you not know how to do that. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, is that it? No, not really. What we can do is if we copy this and actually change this to an H2, what do you think might happen? Well, in actual fact, it will get smaller. Okay, so we've got H1, which is the biggest, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. So if we go ahead and create all those, so let's copy and paste this. If you any guys do actually want the source files, just let me know and I'll gladly put a link up. I'm pretty confident you won't need any. I'm sure you'll get straight on creating your own. So let's just continue to copy these. 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Let's change this to form. I know this is a little bit tedious. I'll try and be as quick as I can. Remember, always open and close tags. Okay. And we do that. And here we go. So as you can see, we've got our H1, our H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. I think there is a H7. I can't remember off the top of my head. To be perfectly honest, don't really need to remember all those. Pretty much between header 1 and I would say maybe 4 are the most used. So kind of just remember those, to be perfectly honest. It's not really hard to remember, really. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. We actually, I mean, this isn't in the scope of the course, but just to give you a little insight is what we can do is we can actually style these. So this is actually going into CSS, but as I say, I'll give you a little insight. So if we go style equals to double quotes, and then say, for example, color, yeah, and then we go red, okay, and then we close, yeah. So if we now save that, Control S, and refresh, our header is now red. And you can actually do the same for the paragraph. So we go style equals double quotes color, and we'll say blue. Oops, does it if I spell style correctly. Okay, and refresh that, and that's now blue. And again, you can literally add multiple things here. Font size, I don't know, 100 pixels, just for laugh. There we go, massive now. Yeah, so you can pretty much change anything with those tags using CSS. This is what you call inline CSS. Okay, as I say, it's not a scope of the course, but yeah, we'll go over CSS at another time and go into great detail on how we can change everything about page. That's pretty much it with regards to headers and paragraphs. Yeah, what we're going to do now is jump on to possibly next one. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask as we go along, or you can pause the video, ask a question, and then once you get your answer, you can jump on to next. So what's our next one? So we've got ordered lists and unordered lists. Got ordered and unordered lists. I'm not going to go too much detail with these. There's really not much you can do at a HTML level other than output what you want. It's only when you get to CSS that you can customize these tags just ridiculous amounts. I just wanted to let you know that unordered and ordered list. So an unordered list is essentially outputting the various section where you can see we've got bullet points. The ordered list is showing a set of numbers. Very rare do you see an ordered list. They are used, just not as much as unordered. Unordered lists are generally used for navigations. I think, from a personal preference, that the unordered lists are pretty much used on every website for their navigation. Okay, and it's only the CSS that you use that doesn't make them look like they are list items. So as you can see here, we've got our UL tag, which is unordered list, and then we've got our LIs, which is list items. We can indeed, of course, add classes to these items. We can also add IDs. You can pretty much do anything you want with these. They're so useful. You will come to learn this when you actually come start using back-end languages. For HTML, as I say, there's not much you can do with them other than the CSS, which we will get to when we come to the CSS course. All I wanted to do is make you aware of them. I will go into greater detail on how we can use these, how we can customize them, how we can style them, you name it. I will try my best to get as much detail about these, but as from a HTML point of view, all you need to know is how they're structured, what they are, and how you use them. We now move on to images. Images are very important due to the fact that a lot of websites use them. They make your site look pretty, they make it informative. It generally just it catches people's eyes when you've got a nice image or an image that may interest you. An image can be quite difficult at times with getting the image to be exactly where you want it on the actual page. Again, that's going to be due with CSS, but just putting an image on a website isn't good enough, and you need to combine HTML tags with the CSS to make the image look and feel like it's a part of the website and not something that's just kind of standing out where it shouldn't be. So let's go look at the source code of this. So again, we've got our main HTML structure, and then we've got our image tag with a closing tag, and then we've got this here, which is src. So you might be thinking, what's src? So src is actually short for source. So all that's doing is saying the source is equal to this particular image. Okay, so that's essentially saying that that image is in the same directory as this file, and then essentially you want to output this to the browser. We can, of course, tell the source that it's not actually in the same directory, but rather in a different folder. And this is a common practice to actually do. You don't generally have images in the same folder as HTML files or just any kind of language files. So in general practice, people normally do one or two things. They either normally do img slash and then the image. So that's telling you that this is going to be in the folder, and then this image is then inside the folder we've just specified here. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? So what we've got is we've got the HTML file, say for example on our desktop, and then we create a file on our desktop, a folder should I say, not a file, a folder called img. You then put your image inside that particular folder. So then when the HTML file begins to look for this image here, it will first look in the instance of that folder. So as I was saying about general practice, is people normally name the folders either img or just standard images. So you can name this whatever you like. You could name this Bob if you really wanted to. It doesn't matter. But general practice is you normally have image or images. Okay, it's just like when you have JavaScript, okay, and you've got a source. This, by the way, this is not tags. This isn't correct tags. I'm just showing you something. So when we've got a source, okay, and we've got JavaScript files. JavaScript files could be named anything you want. So I'm just going to name this Java script. Okay, so this is essentially .js. So this is essentially telling the HTML file it's going to look for a file named that. Okay, I mean we could create script tags. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. Okay, so this is the correct way of, oops, it's done it for me. This is the correct way of telling the HTML file that you want to look for a JavaScript file. And also, just a quick note, I know this isn't exactly JavaScript or anything, but when you do script tags for JavaScript, in general practice, we actually put it at the bottom. So the reason for that is for performance. If you've got a very large JavaScript file, you want the JavaScript file to load after the HTML. Because if, for example, you've got a lot of JavaScript and you have it inside the head, okay? If you have it inside the head and it's a very large file and you want all your HTML to load first, because if it doesn't, it's going to continue loading this file before it starts rendering everything else. So that's just a quick note. You know, JavaScript at the bottom, HTML loads first, then the JavaScript. But anyway, let's get back to what we was doing. Okay, so images. Again, with image tags, we can add classes. We can add IDs. Okay, just like any other tag. So there's not much more we can do with the image tag. It was just more for the fact that I need to let you know, guys, how you would find the image, and also if you wanted to put it in a separate folder, you can by just stating the images folder name or the img folder name. Okay, so that's pretty much images, and we'll go on to the next section. I'll move on to forms, and I love forms. Forms are absolutely awesome, but in the same sense they can actually be a pain in the bum too, because of security. I won't talk about security too much, but I'll give you a little insight as to why security matters. With forms, they are, again, another pivotal part of a website. This is how users can input information so that companies then can gather that information, whether it be to add it to a database, whether it be to subscribe to a newsletter. whether it be to create a user profile. There's all different kinds of uses a form can do. Now, there's also a lot of different things you can do with form inputs. As you can see there, we've got an action, we've got a different type of method. So I'm just going to go through some of these inputs, the method, the action, and the different kind of things we can do with forms. I can't go into too much detail because it will just take forever to actually go through every last little bit about a form. So I'll try and give as much detail as I can. So let's go ahead and look at the structure. So again, we've got our main HTML structure, and then we first get to this HTML tag form. Okay, so this is telling the browser that you're going to be doing an action, i.e. a user is going to be given the browser some input to then send that input to either another page or the same page, depending on the backend language you're using and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's just essentially telling the browser you're going to take some input and then you're going to take that information and you're going to do something with it. Okay, so let's look at action. Okay, action. Well, it's kind of self-explanatory. An action is you do something. So what an action does is essentially tell the form where you want this information to go. So for example, we could have a backend file that is named complete underscore form. This is just an example .php. So essentially, this particular file has some backend logic and coding to process this entire form. So essentially, all this action is doing is finding this file, which the file that it goes to then gets all this information and then tells the server what it wants to do with it, whether it just be add it to the database, to create some kind of email, to create a subscription to a newsletter, etc. Okay, so you just remember that an action is telling which file to go to process the form. Okay, so we now got method. Now, method can get quite frustrating quite easily because in some instances, get is very easy to use. Okay, so what get does is essentially it's self-explanatory. What it does, it gets the information from these inputs. So if, for example, I was to input James as my first name and Hayes as the last name. So it's getting that information when you submit the button or the input in this case. So that's telling the browser you're going to get the information. But the difference being that when you use the get method puts this information into what we call a query string. Okay, so it's a good and a bad thing. Okay, so this, for example, okay, is if we'd actually completed our form with that first name and last name as James Hayes, we would have possibly something like this. So what it does, it puts the actual output into the browser address bar. Now, sometimes this is useful. A lot of times it's not. So, for example, if we want to do a search, say for example like Google, for example, we're on now, and we search, you should see here. I mean, it's not always going to be the same, but as you can see here, oops, that's helpful. Okay, so as you can see, it's output in the address bar what I searched. So if you're going to be using passwords, that's not going to be very secure. So you might be thinking, okay, well, how do we get around that? So this is where post comes into it. So post is how you would actually send information that you don't want people to see. So for example, if you don't want people to see a username and password, so it essentially is sending the information without displaying to the user. Now, there is a lot of websites that go into great detail on post, get, and when and when you shouldn't use it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you just got to remember that get will display the information you're trying to send, whereas post will hide the information. And now remember that post is for usernames, passwords, anything you want to be secure and the user not to see. Whereas get, if you want to do possibly a search, or you just want to go on, pull some information from one page to another that's not meant to be confidential. So for example, you have a subscription letter, but you've got a couple of steps you want the user to go through before they actually send the form. So if it goes from one page to the next, you can take, using get, that information into the next page when it loads, and then that string will then get bigger with all that information, then you send it. Okay, as I say, there's a lot about get and post on the web. There's a lot more great detail you can go into. So it's just a matter of learning and understanding and researching the security implications of each one. Okay, so now we're going to go on to input. So input, you might be thinking, okay, so what's input? So input is essentially the part which actually gets output to the browser. So for example, this square box here. So this is an input that the user can type into. So there is different types for input. For example, we could have password here. So when the person begins to type into this input, it will come out as black little dots, so you can't actually see what's being typed. We also have a type submit. So if we have an input of submit with a type of input, then basically you're telling that particular form that you're going to send that information. It's not going to be taking any data from the user other than pressing the button to send. Okay, there's a lot of things we can do with inputs. For example, this is a HTML5 tag, which is really useful. Back in, well, quite a few years ago, people used to have to do JavaScript and back-end validation to check whether the field was required. So if, for example, the field was blank, we would have to literally input code to detect if it's blank and then throw an F if it is. But now we have an attribute required. Now there's two ways you can actually type this. You can type it how I've typed it, or we do required equals required. Okay, now I don't know off the top of my head whether there is a right and wrong way. However, if you think of it like this, me personally, is you've got name, okay, we've got type. So my understanding, you wouldn't just type required. You wouldn't just type this. You can, but me personally, I would like to keep everything consistent. So I would keep it required is equal to required. You might be thinking, okay, what does that do? Well, let's go ahead and have a look. So let's open this up in a browser. Okay, let's find the file first. Okay, so let's quickly find the file. Okay, so if I leave this blank and click submit, it's telling me that it's blank and that I need to input some information. So if I then go blah, 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 and then try and send this, it's going to throw me an error because I haven't set up the action correctly. And it's telling me, of course, but if you look here, because I'm using get, it's input it into the query string. So if we go back, okay, but as you can see, it accepted it, but as soon as I don't input that, it gives me an error. Now, as I say, let's show you password. Okay, again, the name doesn't really matter. This is just like, for example, giving the field literally just a name, what you want it to be named. And this becomes useful later on when you use back-end languages. So let's save that. Let's hard refresh. Okay, so if I now input that and then begin inputting, there we go. We get black dots. We can't actually see. However, regarding the get, as you can see, it's actually output it. Now, if I change this to post and save, and then we go back, do a hard refresh. FYI, hard refresh on Chrome is Control-Shift-R, clear cache. So let's input this. And let's do a password of password. And now look, it's no longer outputting the query string. It's now hiding the information we was wanting to send. And then obviously it's trying to complete the action that I put in the form. Now, again, I'm not going to go through all the input fields. Okay, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of inputs, text areas, buttons, and all other bits and bobs you can learn. I can, again, if you want the information, I can get that information and I can post it to you. So that's pretty much it for forms. As I said, learn, post and get correctly. Learn, when you start getting on back-end languages, this will become very important. Some browsers don't actually, they have compatibility issues with HTML5, I believe, but I don't know off the top of my head which ones. But that's a very, very basic form. So we'll go on to the next section. As I say, if you need any information, just let me know and I'll try and get that and post it to you. So now I'm going on to tables. Tables, how to put it, back in the 90s, I'd say, maybe early 2000, tables were actually used to create websites. They were used to display the layouts of websites. Not so much anymore because browser technology has come a long way since then. Nowadays, nowadays tables are essentially used to group things like, for example, displaying user accounts. So you'll have the name, you'll have their email, you have a section where you might have edit, delete, update, etc. Tables aren't used as much as they were, but they are still used, so you still need to know about them. There's not really much to them. They're quite simple. The only things that can get a little bit annoying rather than complicated is the styling of them. There is frameworks and stuff like that make styling a lot easier, but if you want to do it off the bat on CSS, it can get quite annoying, a bit frustrating at times. So let's just go through the structure of the table itself. So I'll start with the first thing I'll start with is, let's just ignore this section for the moment and the time being. Okay, so we've got our tags table, we've got our table head, table row, and then we've got our TD. Okay, so table data. So essentially we've then got the table body, table row, table data, then we've got our table foot, table row, table data. So essentially that is literally all there is to it. Obviously you've got to have your closing tags, just like any other HTML closing tags. You can style these. So this is what this section is here. So if I didn't actually have this here, then basically there would be no table. There'd be no styling to the table. So if we comment that out and save that, and then if we open up my table picture page, there we go. We don't actually, although the styling of it being in a table is there, things like border and stuff that you can't see, so it doesn't look like a table. So that's why we put that there. Again, this tables are more CSS. There's more you can do with CSS than there is HTML, other than adding classes and IDs and that kind of stuff. Isn't much you can do with tables. There's stuff you can read about tables if you wanted to go in great detail about them. As I say, back in the 90s, tables were used for the layout of a page, but not really anymore unless the website is rather old. So that's all for tables I'm really going to go into great detail about. As I say, there's plenty of resources online if you really wanted to learn about them. As I say, it's more for example, we could have username, and then that would be a name, James. Then we could have something like email, and then we could have support justdevelopers.co.uk, and then in the footer we could just have, I don't know, copy, I don't know, this is rather random, but copyright just developers. If we save that, go into there, let's refresh, and then we could have something like that. So it's just kind of, you know, tables are used to display usernames, the information, a few bits of information, and like an edit button for those. It's kind of just displaying information about something. As I say, tables aren't really used very often anymore. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave it for this. So we'll go on to the next section, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we moved on to links now. Just before we start, as you can see, I've got styles in that image. Ignore that. I forgot to remove it when I took the image. Yeah, anyway, so back to links. So links pretty much make up, I would say, 90% of a web page. Pretty much everything you will click on is a link, without fail. So links are the integrity of any website. Without links, the page is just not going to do anything. It's just going to sit exactly where it is. And it's going to be quite boring. So let's have a look at links and what they can do and what they're capable of. So let's go over to the source code of the link. So regarding the link, there's not much to it. So we've got A. So the A is obviously for anchor. Okay, so when HTML is being output by the browser, it looks for the A tag, sees it's an anchor, and then will output it as a link. Okay, and then within that we've got something called href. So the href is essentially telling the browser that it's a link, and that when that link is pressed, that you want it to go to that page. So there's many different kinds of things we can do with this. So we can link to different we can link to folders, and then some page.html. We can link it through folders just like you would with images. You can link externally. So if we have HTTP like this and google.com, that will take us to Google. See, there is another thing we can do, which is target. Okay, so target. So target is essentially expressing to the browser how the link behaves. So you've probably been on a website where if you click on a link, it doesn't take you off their website, but just opens up a new window. Or you could have it that when you click a link, it will take you away from where you are and then to another page. So by default, it's set up to be that it takes you away from the page. But if you didn't want that, all you do is you do it underscore blank. So what that means is essentially it's going to open up a new instance and a new window. So let's go ahead and try this, okay? So let's refresh this. Okay, so we've got our link. Now if we look in the bottom left hand corner, you can see that it says google.com. So when we click that, it's opened up a new instance of Google Chrome, a new window, and it's taken us to Google. So what happens if we was to remove the blank section? Let's remove the target. Okay, so as I say, by default, it should be set up that it just essentially takes you to that page rather than, it's hard to refresh. It essentially will take you to that page, but taking you out of the current website. And there you go. I'm no longer on my website. I'm now on Google. So let's go back. So links are very customizable with CSS. There's a lot of CSS that you can use to customize a link. So as it currently stands, it's set that it's blue with an underscore. So if we go into here, so again, this is developer Chrome tools. Okay, let's make it slightly bigger so we can read. Okay, see, we don't actually have any style, but as you can see here, it's giving a basic how web browsers interpret an anchor. So as we can see, its text decoration is given an underline. So there is such thing as called, so if we just do a hover, oh, why has that done that? That should work. Oh, it's because it's detecting. Right, okay. Might not be able to do it via this. Ignore this maybe. Okay. We'll ignore this then till we do the CSS. But essentially you can do the anchor and then colon and then hover. And then if we hovered over that, we put our cursor on it, we could turn it purple, red, yellow, anything. We could do so much with it. We could add a border. There's a lot of things we can do. So as I say, anchors make up a good 90 to 95, 96% of a website. Without anchors, the website would just be boring. It won't do anything. It'd just be static. So that's pretty much it for anchors. Again, we can add classes. We can add IDs. We can also, with the backend language, have these created dynamically. So what I mean by dynamically is that we can say, for example, we want to add a link to a website without actually going in the backend code and doing it. So we can do via database, etc., to add new links to a website. But that's backend technology, which we're not looking at. So as I say, this is essentially just the title of the link. So I can change this to anything I want. As I say, there's not much more you can talk about links other than when we get to CSS. So have a play around with some anchors, have a play around with the targets within the anchors, the hrefs, linking to different folders, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, let's go on to the next section, which is iFrames. On to iFrames and the HTML entities. I'm not going to go into much detail at all. Just going to let you know what they are, how they work, and that's it. iFrames. So iFrames are essentially being able to embed other website content or an actual website into your site. So as you can see from the output on the right hand side there, I've embedded into my web page skysports.com. Okay, and then I've given a width in the pixels just so it doesn't take up the entire page. Okay, that's all there is to iFrames. You're essentially referencing their website to then embed the website in your website. iFrames normally aren't allowed to be used by many businesses due to the fact that it's security. It can cause their sites to slow down because there's a lot of requests for it. There's many reasons. So a lot of top businesses don't allow it. And that's pretty much it for iFrames. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to do. As I say, because they're not really used. I don't think I've ever seen a website without actually purposely trying to look for one. You're just not really going to see one. Okay. So the next section is HTML entities. HTML entities are essentially bits of code that allow you to input certain characters. Because if we look at the example there, when you look at tags, they've got the brackets. Okay. So we've got the less and greater signs. If we was to actually put where I've got test, if I was to actually put the great less than sign before test, the browser is going to interpret that that is part of a tag. So there was some code created to allow to input certain tags which is known to be used for programming languages. So as you can see, I've used the ampersand LT and then a semicolon. So what that does is then outputs the actual bracket. Because if we didn't actually do that, okay, so let's go over to here. Okay, and if I remove this and then input the actual sign, the browser's going to interpret that as being a tag. So if we save this and refresh this, it's going to output it. However, okay, if I was then to try and use some more tags, okay, I'm trying to think of the best way how to describe this, but so if I then do test 2, as you can see, for starters, my IDE's picked up that there's something incorrect. So that's telling it that this is an opening, this is a closing, then some text, and it's telling it it's opening a bracket again. And then it's going to be expecting a close bracket, but it's not going to have that. So that is why we have to use HTML entities like this. And then it outputs it. So it's essentially just stopping browsers and IDEs from interpreting that the code isn't finished, essentially. There is other ones, but I'm not going to go into detail because there's just lots and lots of them. Okay, so there is websites you can find a list of HTML entities. You just got to remember and learn which ones are not supported without an HTML entity, i.e. less than, greater than. Okay, that's all the detail I'm going to go into with these because it's just not worth it. It's just something you just have to reference and look up when you need them. But as I say, iframe, not really used. Security issues, companies don't like it because there's requests that they unnecessarily need. It's more stress on their servers, etc. And then also you've got your HTML entities. As I say, it's just something you're going to need to look up and learn, and just kind of save the reference to them and look them up when you need them, really. That's pretty much it for the end of this course. I know it's very basic. It is a basic intro. It's not something that's going to sit here and give you every single little bit of information you need. The whole point of this is that you gather a few little basics, then you go away and then you try and use some of the things that you can see. The idea of programming is that you practice, practice, practice. That is the only way you're going to learn, is jumping in the deep end. If you're not jumping in the deep end and just reading or watching, you're not going to take it in as much as by doing. Okay, so I can't stress enough, just give yourself a little project that you want to create a little website, you know, and just try. You're gonna run into complications, you're gonna run into errors, you're gonna run into things that don't look right. But the idea of that is to learn how to cope with those problems, Googling, researching, and finding out what could be causing that problem, finding the solution, implementing the solution, then remember what you did so you can do it again next time. Because the more you do it, the more you'll remember it and go, oh, that's that, rather than think, oh no, what do I have to do now? So just remember, guys, this is just a basic intro. If you want more information, if you want more help, just let us know, and I'll try and point you in the right direction. If it means creating a tiny little video on a little bit more detail, then so be it. It's not a problem, okay? So I'm going to leave it there. As I say, get yourself straight dug in, practicing, practicing, practicing. Okay, so my next course will be the CSS course. CSS is massive. There is so much to it. I will try and cover all the basics from display, positions, floats, clear fix. You know, there's there's so much. I will bring out a tiny little course about HTML5. I mentioned it a little bit earlier on the course about semantic tags, and they are quite important now with regards to being compliant with W3C standards, and that kind of stuff. So just get yourself out there, guys. Have a good old practice. As I say, if you need help, just give us a post, and someone or I or someone else will be able to help. That's the idea of this community, and what I'm trying to build. So yeah, good luck, guys. See you later. Just before you go, there's something I wanted to show you guys. This little slideshow that I've been going throughout the entire course. I've got something to show you. So this actual slideshow I've been using has actually been using CSS, HTML, a bit of JavaScript. This is an actual website I created off my own back. Okay, so it just goes to show that something so simple can be created with just a little bit of coding and a little bit of knowledge. If you want the source code for this particular website, okay, it's not a problem. It's not clean. It's not very tidy. However, what I did, just to let you guys know a little bit about it, okay, so what I did is I created all my standard HTML stuff. I'm actually using Bootstrap just purely for the CSS and quickness, okay. Bootstrap is a framework, if you didn't know, which allows you to create responsive websites pretty quickly. You don't really have to, you just have to reference classes, okay? So what I mean is, so for example, container fluid is essentially telling the browser that you're going to use the full width of the page, okay? This is telling it it's a new row, and this is telling it's going to be a 12-column website. So websites are based on grids, and the grid is 12 columns. Okay, so I've essentially created a div with a container for that particular section. So if we go down to here, as you can see here, so this is one section, okay, which is all the information. This is the very first page. Okay, so if you go back, that's this page here. Okay, as you can see all the information. And all I did is I then added another div, another container with the next page. And then what I actually did to actually have the whole click next button and everything else is I actually used a bit of jQuery. See, jQuery is essentially a library for JavaScript. It's just a bunch of libraries. So all I did is when next page one is clicked, so which is here, next page one is clicked, I'm going to execute page one as hide. So page one is where's that? It's here. So within my container, I'm hiding that container, and then all I'm doing is showing the next container, which the next container starts here. And that's all I did, is hide, show, hide, show, hide, show. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Very simple, yet effective. I managed to do what I wanted to do with it and get you guys a little slideshow up. So that's just what I wanted to say before I go. You can create something effective like this, and yet it's very simple to do. But yeah, anyway guys, let me know if you want any source code or anything like that. Cheers, and see you later.